Yes,
Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us at this lecture today, whether you're here in person or whether you're joining us on the live stream. It's great to have you with us. I'm Marion Thane, I'm Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Humanities here at King's, and I'm also the Chair Director of the new Digital Futures Institute at King's, which we launched just a couple of weeks ago. And on behalf of the faculty and on behalf of the college, I'd like to welcome you to this very special moment, this very special event, which is our inaugural King's Public Lecture in Digital Humanities. And as you know, King's Digital Humanities is a globally leading light, and I couldn't be more proud of what my colleagues have achieved here. Our Department of Digital Humanities continues to grow and thrive and has become home for critical inquiry with and about the digital. Both studying evolving roles and consequences of digital technologies in society, politics, and culture, as well as the ways in which we as scholars can thoughtfully bring digital data, tools, and infrastructures into our research, teaching, and service activities. Working closely with the Department of Digital Humanities, we also have our Centre for Digital Culture, which is now framed within the Digital Futures Institute at King's, and of course we have the esteemed King's Digital Lab also here in the faculty. While this work involves encounters with new and emerging technologies, it also builds on 30 years of intellectual inquiry at the intersection of arts, humanities, and computing technologies. Reaching back indeed to the Centre for Computing in the Humanities, founded in 1991, which seems like a different world now, and which of course later evolved into the department that we have here today. And at this first King's Public Lecture in Digital Humanities, we're really delighted to have Shannon Mattern with us tonight for a talk on modelling doubt, coding humility, a speculative syllabus, which is going to explore the role of humility, doubt, and uncertainty in our ways of knowing and working. Really, it feels really topical. It feels like this is something we all need to be thinking about now. So Shannon Mattern is the Penn Presidential Compact Professor of Media Studies and the History of Art at the University of Pennsylvania. And from 2004 to 2022, she served in the Department of Anthropology and the School of Media Studies at the New School in New York. And her writing and teaching focuses on media architectures and infrastructures and spatial epistemologies. She's written books about libraries, maps, and urban intelligence, and she contributes to a column about urban data and mediated spaces in Places Journal. So without further ado, we can warmly welcome Professor Mattern tonight.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everybody for coming, and to all the folks who are joining us on the live stream. I want to thank again the King's organizers for accommodating that so that more people could join in virtually. So this is a new talk. I finished the slides, I will say, at 6 o'clock this morning. That seems to be my habit over the past few years, so I'm going on not a lot of sleep, but I hope this is fresh and still coherent. All right, so this is a talk about doubt, a sentiment that has permeated the last few years of my life, and no doubt the lives of millions across this infected, dejected, neglected world. Doubt about the long-term inhabitability of the planet, doubt about our commitment to protect the elms and elephants with whom we share it, doubt about the state of women's rights and the state of human rights, particularly as they're weighed against the right to bear arms, doubt about the future of democracy, doubt about whether or not we ever really knew those neighbors and family members now proudly espousing fascist beliefs, doubt about our species' capacity for equality and justice and peace, doubt about the possibility of progress. Yet there exists a cadre of delegates, mostly men, but also a few women, willing to make the tough calls, to tell it like it is, to speak up unprompted for others, to boldly declare uncontrovertible truths, to advance an agenda of moral positivism and purity. We've got men defining what it means to be a woman, ontologically, existentially, and pragmatically. We've got panels of religious fundamentalists and white supremacists deciding what students are allowed to read, what they're allowed to know about their own minds and bodies and our society's complicated pasts. Meanwhile, we've got conspiracists in discussion forums drawing completist diagrams linking George Soros to pedophile rings to space lasers, sucking believers into an alternate reality. On a slightly more sane but no less nefarious plane, we've got national leaders and legislators brazenly rewriting laws and redrawing maps to determine who democracy serves. And working in cahoots with these officials, mobs of masked men who are performatively proclaiming who has a right to live peaceably in their own communities. This world of abundant hubris provided the initial impetus for this talk. I promise what follows will not be so heavy-handedly political, yet this political context, which is also cultural and economic, moral and ethical, does constitute the larger arena in which our more delimited focus on technology and epistemology functions. What's more, technology does not operate outside the political arena or the ecological terrain. Consider engineers and investors, legislators and users' varying degrees of confidence and doubt in the capacity of technology to fix or frustrate these wicked problems. Climate tech, for instance, will capture our carbon and make our buildings more energy efficient, while planetary computers will allow us to tweak all species, or to tweak and track all species of the Earth. Digital twins or urban planning simulations will permit us to model and monitor all urban operations. Research teams representing opposing political orientations have demonstrated how social media have swung elections, although they tend to marshal data to tell widely divergent stories about how this techno-determinism takes place. There are still apparently some people out there who think that the blockchain will revolutionize everything, but in recent months, the large language models have dampened crypto's clamor. LLMs like ChatGPT purportedly bring us closer to artificial general intelligence, which will do everything we can do, that is, everything that's profitable we can do, but do it better. There's been some concern with the bias built into these models and its training data, but fear not, quantum computers will fix it, and I hope this video works.
Quantum computers can act as a fact checker. You can ask a quantum computer to remove all the garbage, remove all the nonsense in these articles, and it'll do that. So, in other words, the hardware may be a check on some of the wild statements made by software.
But the problem with that is, who's the arbiter of the information? Like, who decides what's real and what's not? How does the chatbot decide? Is the chatbot ideologically biased?
The chatbot doesn't. The chatbot simply
The quantum
spits it out.
computing does.
Yeah, quantum computing can
And
then...
it's going to be able to discern what's real and what's not real, even
And
what's propaganda.
if there are gradations of what is true, like it is partially true or whatever, it can give you the details.
In short, there's a lot of faith placed in computers here, and it seems like there was a joke on Twitter, if you just put quantum in front of everything, you can make any claim you could possibly want to make. Same with crypto a couple years ago. So these hubristic plans and promises are often themselves entangled in conspiracy thinking, what Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres call, I think I might have skipped something, just a second. Oh yes, or, sorry, I skipped a sentence. Or we can turn to Elon Musk's Truth GPT to reveal the nonpartisan secrets of the universe.
I'll try to create a third option, and that third option hopefully does more good than harm. Like the intention with OpenAI was obviously to do good, but it's not clear whether it's actually doing good or whether it's, I can't tell at this point, except that I'm worried about the fact that it's being trained to be politically correct, which is simply another way of being saying untruthful things. That's a bad sign. There's certainly a path to AI dystopia is to train an AI to be deceptive. So yeah, I'm going to start something which you call Truth GPT, or a maximum truth-seeking AI that tries to understand the nature of the universe. And I think this might be the best path to safety, in the sense that an AI that cares about understanding the universe it is unlikely to annihilate humans, because we are an interesting part of the universe.
I say you're allowed to laugh at any time in this presentation. A lot of this is funny, but okay. These hubristic plans and promises are all themselves entangled in conspiracy thinking, what Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres call TESC Real, an acronym that encompasses transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. I doubt I can explain each of those ideological platforms for you, but I'm pretty sure they're all infused with immense narcissism, often developed atop a foundation of manufactured, dramatized doubt. Doubt about humanity's ability to persevere without bespoke technical solutions. At a time, and this is just another kind of manifestation of the hubris that's invested in a lot of this thinking. So at a time of increasing artificial intelligence and proliferating conspiracy, techno-fetishism and moral panics, faith in ubiquitous data capture and mistrust of public institutions, the ascendance of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, or management, I forget which the M is right now, and the deplatforming of the arts and humanities, we should wonder what kind of an epistemological and ethical world we're creating. Prominent ways of knowing have tended to weaponize uncertainty or ambiguity, as we've observed in the debates over COVID vaccines, elections, climate, immigration, and myriad political scandals. We've witnessed such phenomena before, but willful historical ignorance obscures this context. Silicon Valley disruptors' self-mythologization depends upon an erasure of precedent, while education reformers must engage in egregious historical revisionism in order to whitewash colonial and white supremacist legacies that sully their self-regard. So in what follows, we'll consider doubt as an epistemological condition, a political tool, an ethical force, a rhetorical register, and drawing inspiration from Xian Gai's work at ethical and aesthetic category as well. Doubt is a feeling that both compels necessary reflection and restraint and creates opportunity for principled and creative action. Because we're gathered here under the auspices of the Digital Humanities program, we'll focus specifically on how humanistic conceptions of doubt do or could or should manifest in the digital realm. A challenge that I think is evoked quite provocatively in Dashiell Manley's work, which I saw at Marion Boesky Gallery in New York last fall, and I thought it's this nice manifestation of creativity, kind of rigidity, order, and the explosion out of order. I was also asked to address connections between research and teaching, a translation that has shaped all of my work throughout my career, so I've chosen to structure this talk in the form of a speculative syllabus. So, following in that conceit, about your instructor. Doubt is certainly not a new experience for me, but it is indeed a new explicit research focus, one I probably have not mastered and probably will not write about again after this talk. But it's certainly a topic that's of critical importance in my own research and pedagogical methods. I've retrospectively noticed a trend in my research projects over the past few years. While I've long written about the infrastructures we build to make sense of or to provide a semblance of order to complex terrains, from libraries to field guides to toolkits to maps, my more recent work examines how we embrace and embed uncertainty, how we, to borrow a now hackneyed phrase from Donna Haraway, stay with the trouble. I've written pieces on how to map nothing, on mapping lost landscapes, on the green screen as a tool of erasure and imagination, and on redaction as a reparative practice. All imagine uncertainty, if not explicitly doubt, as a condition of possibility. Now to tackle doubt directly. I found that the best way for me to explore a new topic is through teaching. Developing a syllabus is a perfect way to map out the contours of a new to me or new to us terrain. I try to model a healthy measure of self-doubt for my students, which invites them to do the same, and then allows all of us to explore together, humbly and bravely and unself-consciously. Humility is particularly essential here because I don't consider myself a digital humanist. Sure, I'm a humanist, and I think I write and think and write and teach and mess around with digital things, but I've always been a little reluctant to identify with capital D, capital H digital humanities, largely because many of the early gatherings of our local New York City digital humanities focused on what counts as the digital humanities and what doesn't, who's in and who's out. I remember folks talking about how big of a big DH tent we wanted to pitch, and I, as someone who was never conventionally popular as a kid and who thus developed a severe allergy to cliques, decided pretty early that I didn't want to be in. Besides, I'm freaked out by circuses and not a huge fan of camping, so I'd rather stay outside the tent. Thank you very much. So still, I think, and I hope that what we discuss here today will prove relevant to the digital humanities, and ideally to scholars and practitioners in myriad other fields. I like to think that doubt is an epistemological, methodological, aesthetic, and ethical concern that pertains to everything from science and engineering to law and logic to the fine arts and literature. Eventually, I'd like to teach a graduate class on the topic of doubt to help students acknowledge their own intellectual positionality and ethical commitments, to recognize the kinds of knowledge they're producing, to think about the broader potential impacts of that knowledge, and to devise appropriate generative ways of expressing uncertainty that might invite more thoughtful, reflective engagement with their professional and public audiences and interlocutors. My ulterior motives would include modeling and critically reflecting on the value of intellectual humility, and who gets to exhibit it, and how these privileges are shaped by age, gender, race, and class. In the process, I'd want to discourage the combative, competitive, grandstanding, deconstructionist mode of grad school critique, and to help marginalized and first-generation students grapple with their own self-doubt, and to recognize that imposter syndrome is a product not necessarily of personal deficiency, but of a system that wasn't built for and that probably hasn't caught up to them. I'm a state school student myself, which I realize means your public and private kind of denotations are separate here, but went to a public university with a woodworker dad and a teacher mom, and I sure would have welcomed some guidance in wrestling with my own dubious demons in throughout my education. The next section in the syllabus is undefining our terms. Once we agree upon our larger collective purpose, it's probably best to start by defining our key terms. We might draw from classical digital humanities methods, like text mining, to see how doubt has been deployed and defined across various fields. I tried such a survey on a small scale and came to realize how frequently writers use undoubtedly and no doubt not as a resolute epistemological claim. It's not like they're saying, I am telling you 100% total fact, but they use it as a hypothetical rhetorical device, an ethos shield. Much has been written about religious doubt, specifically atheism, which is outside the purview of our discussion, in no small part because I doubt my own ability to do it justice. Jennifer Michael Hecht offers a magisterial history of doubt, which is really quite oxymoronic if you think about it, not doubting her own capacity to cover the entire history of world doubt, that spans from ancient skepticism to modern scientific empiricism, from doubt in many gods to doubt in one God, to doubt that recreates and enlivens faith, to doubt that is really disbelief. And that's a quote from her book. Along the way, she addresses Socratic questioning, Zen koans, Marx's false consciousness, Freud's regard for religious belief as a neurosis, and Nietzsche's nihilism. Philosopher Willem Flusser, in his book On Doubt, focuses specifically on Cartesian doubt, framing it as a successor to religious faith. He proposes that we regard the cogito in cogito ergo sum, that is, thinking or intellectualization, as the progress of doubt, the abandonment of original faith or good faith in favor of a better faith, a less naive and innocent faith. Janet Broughton similarly proposes that, for Descartes, doubt can yield knowledge by uncovering its own preconditions. Historian Peter Burke, meanwhile, traces the genealogy of a parallel condition, ignorance, which often intersects with doubt. Bullshit, which likewise has been historicized and theorized, is implicated here too. We tend to doubt obvious bullshit. Evolutionary biologist Carl Bergstrom and information studies scholar Jevin West remind us that the nature of bullshit, as well as our strategies for managing it, depend upon the material form in which said shit arrives, analog or digital, broadcast or networked, or interpersonal, I guess I could add. The same we'll see is true of doubt. The way we doubt a thing depends in part upon the form of that thing. Sociologists Peter Berger and Anton Zichterveld explain in Praise of Doubt how modernization produced moral pluralities, which led to either relativization, cultural relativization, or fundamentalism, if you really want to dig in your heels. The authors offer doubt as a moderate middle path between these two extremes. Yet sociologist Ulrich Beck argues that doubt isn't always something we have the choice to deploy strategically. Doubt is the product of a networked modernity, he says, that has compromised our state institutions, the law, democratic politics, and social infrastructures, and rendered us vulnerable to global manufactured uncertainties. Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, in their 2010 book, Merchants of Doubt, explain how, across the latter half of the 20th century, a rogue group of well-connected scientists sowed confusion and doubt about the dangers of tobacco, acid rain, the ozone hole, global warming, and the insecticide DDT. Industry representatives, they argue, quote, realize that you could create the impression of controversy simply by asking questions, even if you actually knew the answers and they didn't help your case. And so these industries began to transmogrify emerging scientific consensus into raging scientific debate. So they're manufactured debates about things that most people really agree upon, end quote. They did so in part by enlisting prominent scientists whose expert opinions could be bought, and by exploiting media networks' naive commitment to journalistic balance, that is, being fair to both sides without regard for the weight or seriousness of dissenting perspectives. Industry and the press also took advantage of general misunderstanding about what constitutes causation in scientific research. What happens if I smoke and don't get cancer? What if carbon emissions increase but the temperatures drop? These are kind of causes for people to essentially poke holes in the whole theory. Uncertainty is presumably invalidating. Yet doubt, Oreskes and Conway explain, is crucial to science. In the version we call curiosity or healthy skepticism, it drives science forward. But it also makes science vulnerable to misrepresentation because it is easy to take uncertainties out of context and create the impression that everything is unresolved. As one tobacco executive wrote in an infamous 1969 memo, doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public. It's also the means of establishing a controversy. Over 30 years later, a political strategist, Frank Luntz, warned the Republican Party that the environment was their single biggest vulnerability. Should the public come to believe the scientific issues are settled, their views about global warming will change accordingly. Therefore, you need to continue to make the lack of scientific certainty a primary issue. It's this revelation that prompted Bruno Latour in 2004 to wonder if his decades of work in science studies, which sought to, quote, emancipate the public from prematurely naturalized objective facts, might instead have contributed to the cultivation of doubt, excessive distrust of good matters of fact disguised as bad ideological biases, end quote. The very same theories of social construction that prompts us to question the making of facts and truth in our own standpoints have been deformed and co-opted by conspiracists to, quote, destroy hard-won evidence that could save our lives, end quote. Ulrich Beck warned that a networked information society would amplify and scale the severity of doubt and risk. Latour's article was published the same year Facebook launched, which was definitely a convergence of phenomena. Since then, Islamic extremists and white nationalists, Russian hackers and QAnon devotees, incels and Proud Boys have deployed social media to spread doubt and dubious claims, which have in turn occasionally incited material mayhem and destruction. Conservative activist Chris Rofo is, as we speak, updating Oreskes and Conway for the Truth Social era, that's Trump's social media network, in case you didn't know, by using coordinated disinformation campaigns to manufacture doubt that's meant to upend political or public institutions. In 2021, he tweeted, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perception. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under the brand category." He's done the same thing for the representation of LGBTQIA issues in schools by equating anything not heteronormative with grooming. Quote, "To sow and grow distrust," he stated in a 2022 talk at the conservative Hillsdale College, "you have to create your own narrative frame and have to be brutal and ruthless in pursuing it," end quote. He operates from a premise of universal public school distrust in order to achieve his end goal, which is the institutionalization of universal school choice, which is essentially a euphemism for privatization of education.
And so what we're seeing, I think, as the first step is a narrative and symbolic war against companies like Disney. You have to be very aggressive. You have to fight on terms that you define. You have to create your own frame, your own language. And you have to be ruthless and brutal in pursuit of something good.
So the title of his talk, as you might have noticed if it was on, I'm not sure if it showed on your screen, was "Laying Siege to the Institutions." He went in proposing that as what he was going to talk about, and he did that. Rufo was recently appointed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Sorry, this is a very American talk. I hope you can extrapolate to other geographic contexts. But he was appointed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to the Board of Trustees of New College of Florida, where he's serving to dismantle the liberal institution from within. Florida has also given rise to Moms for Liberty, an activist group that deploys similar techniques to manufacture doubt about public libraries and to advocate for book bans and defunding, and who coach far-right candidates to commandeer library boards. Again, as Beck proposed, network digital technologies have made it easier for misinformation to spread and doubt to fester. Consequently, public institutions suffer. But new technologies also reframe the very nature of doubt in various institutional operations, in education and war, border control, policing, hiring, and banking. all perhaps not coincidentally, realms that the far right charges with espousing woke ideology, and which they propose could be reformed through the integration of more objective in quotes, decision-making. Automation ostensibly offers such objectivity. As geographer Louisa Moore explains, the algorithm transforms doubt about who'll get arrested or admitted or audited, into a malleable arrangement of weighted probabilities. Though this arrangement of probabilities contains within it a multiplicity of doubts in the model, the algorithm nonetheless condenses this multiplicity into a single output with a numeric value, a risk score, a ranking, a target. The algorithm thus renders an actionable decision that is purportedly beyond doubt. But what if a security guard doubts the accuracy of his building's facial recognition system? Or if a mortgage or admissions officer doubts the fairness of her firm's automated vetting process? What confidence does a researcher place in new chatbots that, according to an internal Microsoft document, are built to be persuasive, not truthful? Where's the human in the loop? The algorithm, too, is continually recalibrated to determine how anomalies and uncertainties are flagged and tagged. Moore proposes that we reimagine doubt as a distributed post-human concern. Doubtfulness, she writes, expresses the many ways in which algorithms dwell within us, just as we too dwell on data and test subjects within their layers. I spent a couple hours having fun last night seeing how I could give the most abstruse prompts to image generators to see how terrible the images were they generated, so that's what the next few slides are. So, and just as theories of the extended mind or embodied cognition suppose that thinking is distributed beyond our individual brains, perhaps doubt, too, resides in between ourselves and our technologies and various other epistemological objects and decision-making protocols in our environments. Doubt about where I am lies somewhere between me and my Google Maps and the orientation of the sun. Doubt about my bullshit job emerges through the triangulation of my brain and various imposed professional protocols and some crappy enterprise software whose data model dictates what's important. One more example, I doubted this machine's ability to complete the task, and it exceeded my expectations by vastly underperforming. So, such a distributed ecological conception of doubt also suggests a method of investigation that exceeds the frameworks that philosophy or psychology or theology can offer. Latour proposed that if social constructionist critique had run out of steam, to quote the title of his article, perhaps we'd be better served by framing inquiry as a gathering rather than a deconstruction or a knocking down, a gathering together. Quote, a multifarious inquiry launched with the tools of anthropology, philosophy, metaphysics, history, sociology to detect how many participants are gathered in a thing to make it exist and maintain its existence. If to say that thing were doubt, we might foster such an interdisciplinary investigation, gathering together the various specialties that Latour already mentioned, and maybe adding engineers, data scientists, statisticians, ecologists, cartographers, risk managers, bioethicists, neuroscientists, lawyers, poets, filmmakers, artists, and designers to consider the various modes of study and practice that not only grapple with doubt, what it is, that generate it and sustain it, but also productively deploy it, for good or for ill, thoughtfully frame it, make it experiential, maybe even work to restrain or transform it into trust and wisdom. As digital humanists, we might consider how to model doubt or code humility, but we should also consider when and where digital methods reach their limits, and when we, too, have to gather together other approaches and pursue our work within a larger, distributed, interdisciplinary field. That's precisely where I've enjoyed working throughout my career, in that gathering between media studies, information studies, anthropology, architecture, urban planning, art, and design. The diverse flora and fauna in that field inform the design of our syllabus, and in future iterations, which would include in future iterations more scholarship and practical applications from statistics, law, accountancy, and myriad other fields I simply haven't had the time to explore and about which my own knowledge is currently dubious. The next section then, after defining our terms, is some case studies where we get more into the digital applications of it. So we start at the interface. That said, given the occasion and setting of our gathering here today, we can begin by reviewing the sizable body of research on rendering or visualizing uncertainty in data-driven projects. If the departmental context for our speculative syllabus is within a digital humanities, data science, or design program, I'd probably start here with the tools and skills students tend to regard as most relevant and marketable, and at the site where most of us meet our data or engage with technical systems, at the interface. Well, we begin with some contemporary examples, again, to hook students initially, to draw them in with things that they're familiar with, to pique student interest. I'd also make sure to reference the long history of the ambiguous interface, especially cartographers' experience with mapping dubious terrains. Medieval and Renaissance mapmakers famously demarcated the edges of the discovered world with mythical sea creatures that embodied the limits of exploration and knowledge. As historian Chet Van Duzer argues, these monsters represented a variety of epistemological orientations. They served as interfaces between the known and unknown, possible portals to new discovery. They were manifestations of a horror vacui, a fear of empty spaces, and their marginal position pushed threat out to a safe distance, perhaps even relegating those Freudian monsters to the subconscious. This precedent would allow us to examine the psychoanalytic dimensions of doubt through cartography. We'd also, in the class, study the late 18th century geographer Jean-Baptiste Bourguignon d'Anville, and my French is terrible, which is why I just sped through that as fast as possible, who was known for deploying vast spaces, vast blank spaces that marked what was not yet known, while also serving as proof of the exactitude of all that was filled in. So you trusted the veracity of what he did offer because there was so much that was actually left blank. There's much to say about the epistemological and political dimensions of blank spaces, and there's a good deal of excellent writing on this topic that we can incorporate into the class. There's also been a significant amount of recent research in the digital humanities and communication design about how we can represent ambiguity and uncertainty, with the intention of cultivating productive reflexivity and maybe doubt. Because of the wealth of such resources, I'd have to explore much more deeply and widely to determine what texts and examples belong on the syllabus. But a recent paper by Georgia Panegiotidou, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's a lecturer here at King's, is a good starting point. Georgia worked with a team of colleagues to review 126 digital humanities publications to assess how their authors visualized ambiguity. The team identified myriad potential sources of ambiguity, including missing, imprecise, conflicting, or unverified data, and errors in digitization, coding, classification, and modeling. And they looked at a range of strategies for addressing these issues in data analysis, acknowledging and contextualizing ambiguity, excluding problematic data points, using computational methods to fill in the missing data, and/or using manual methods to evaluate and correct doubtful data. Again, our class could consider the methodological, epistemological, and ethical implications of these various strategies and how they play out in context both within and outside the digital humanities. So Georgia and her colleagues found that most researchers addressed data ambiguities textually through captions and caveats, written out caveats, rather than trying to signal doubt graphically. We observed a similar strategy recently when Google's Bard chatbot used text to acknowledge uncertainty and perhaps elicit some healthy skepticism. Priming its users to doubt the tool also, of course, serves to limit the company's liability when Bard generates fabrications and falsehoods, which chatbots are wont to do. Bard introduces itself at the top of the page. I'm Bard, your creative and helpful collaborator, and immediately acknowledges its flaws. I have limitations and won't always get it right, but your feedback will help me improve. Humanizing the bot, a positioning strategy made visual and interactive too, through the UX designer's choice to have these bots incrementally reveal their answers to us as if they're thinking at 180 words per minute, certainly informs us how we relate to it and hold it accountable. In our speculative class, we consider these various linguistic and UX strategies and their implications for operationalizing doubt. As an aside, I'll note that I met yesterday with a former thesis advisee, Agnes Cameron, who's also now a technician at UAL's Creative Computing Institute. Her team has found that chatbots are particularly adept at explaining technical error messages. In other words, they're relatively confident when it comes to translating computers' own attempts to communicate their fallibilities. There's like a weird Mobius strip thing that I can't quite wrap my head around there, but it's kind of fitting that they can explain, probably better than some humans, when they fail. Yet there's also been a great deal of experimentation around visually embodying ambiguity. And in this age of memes and mid-journey and deepfakes, it's particularly important to understand how graphics are made and how they're meant to function rhetorically. How can we learn to doubt the veracity of an image? And how can images embody clues to their own critique and prompt doubtful reception? Communication designer Valeria Bergio offers a glossary of ambiguity aesthetics, from blurry borders to figures vanishing in the background, from color gradients that vary according to different degrees of probability, to the omnipresence of shades of gray, from oscillation to swarming in and animated information visualization. Opacity and color saturation commonly operate on a gradient of certainty and doubt. Just 2 days ago, Susan Shupley is here, I just visited the Center for Research Architecture at Goldsmiths, where team members told me that when building 3D models, they use abstraction, much like architectural massing studies, where you don't really kind of flesh out the facade, you just have a big white box to convey their uncertainty about particular areas in a terrain. And that they've begun developing a particular graphic language in publications to distinguish between evidentiary, speculative, and other genres of images. Some designers use particular graphic forms, error bars, violin plots, quantile dot plots, or forecast tracks, like you see with a hurricane, for instance, to display data distributions, and we might say preemptively manage doubt. 3 of my former New School colleagues, Erin Hill, Claire Churchhouse, and Michael Schober, discussed the limitations of these conventional techniques and proposed instead that we look to fine art for ideas about how to use placement, shape, orientation, color, texture, value, and size to convey uncertainty. In our speculative class, we build a toolkit, or because there are some that exist, consult those that already exist and mash them together. We try out various approaches, we productively misuse them, we consider how various graphic treatments make arguments and make ethos and pathos appeals. But graphics aren't the only way to evoke doubt. Data scientists have also tried deploying sound to convey ambiguity. Andrea Bellatore, David Gordon, and Alexander Boone tested various qualities in data sonification: loudness, duration, location, pitch, register, attack, decay, rate of change, noise, timbre, clarity, order, and harmony, and found that loudness, clarity, and the order of tones, whether it's going up or down, for instance, most intuitively conveyed ambiguity to listeners. Of course, there's a long history of music conveying doubt: halting voices, bows scratched across strings, the existential doubt of a middle school band concert. I'm sure opera is full of doubt, but I don't know enough about it to offer examples. I do know that second wave emo from the 1990s was imploding with doubt, from the lyrics lamenting unrequited love to the voices palpably doubting their own capacity to reach those screamy high notes that they actually wrote for themselves, to the jangly guitars locked in a spiral of woe. Which brings us to a little intermission. What should be playing in the background here, I'll turn it down, is a song and serenading from Houston-based band Mineral, a band I listened to on repeat while lying on the floor in the dark because they embody my own copious doubt as a college student and turned it into something joyous. And while you listen, I invite you to point your phone, if you want, to this QR code, where if any of the things we're talking about today inspire or make you think of other examples of concrete applications that you would like to add, I will then collate everything into an arena channels later. I'm glad to see people are actually doing this. That's great. I thought you'd all just be sitting there. So anytime throughout, if you can think of anything that fits into these categories, please feel free to add it to the Google Doc. I'll admit also, I know it's dangerous to put an open Google Doc out in the web with everybody having editing practices, and I was a little doubtful about that, but I hope there are no spammers or trolls in here who are going to kind of mess it up for everybody. So I'll give you just a second, I'll take a drink, and then we'll move on. All right. So now, after looking at the interface, we dig a little bit deeper and look at coding and modeling doubt. If, as Moore proposes, doubt is distributed embodied phenomenon, we might also want to consider how it extends behind the interface, past the content we consume through screens or speakers. How might we code or model doubt? AI researcher Dmitry Muravyev studies activist engagement with the DTP map, which tracks traffic accidents in Russia, but whose official data is often erroneous and incomplete. Muravyev finds that users doubt the data, but still actively participate in its improvement. They advocate for critical analysis that acknowledges the data's limitations in order to maintain trust in the map and its larger civic function. He describes the epistemic virtue of datified doubt, a disposition towards data that is hopefully pessimistic, open-ended, and rooted in practice. When people are engaged in recognizing what counts as data, when they're involved in deciding what data sets can be layered or composited to understand a complex phenomenon, and when they're performing the labor of data production, cleaning it, annotating it, curating it, they can better understand how to position and possibly balance their doubt and trust within the technological assemblage. Such a unit in our speculative class would integrate the principles of data feminism, indigenous data sovereignty. It would engage with theories of data colonialism and the ethical principles of community archiving. We'd examine some data ethnographies, perhaps even give us an opportunity to perform our own data walks, which LSE's Alison Powell uses as a methodology often, which encourages students to observe digital mediations in their own space of the city. Or we'd engage in walkthroughs, wherein you invite users to walk you through the way they use technology. We'd consider how various digital tools, enterprise software is one of my favorite examples, how they require us to bend to its will, adapting our questions and methods to accommodate the tool's demands and limitations, and then obligating us to perform particular forms of administrative labor that might not be aligned with the ethos of our own work. An anthropologist Joe Dumet's implosion method, which I use often in my teaching, could be useful here too. We might start with a database or a data-rich environment and consider how it came to be, what agents made those choices, with what specific interests that informed its creation and operation, what ways of knowing converge within it, and how it embodies trust and doubt. I adapted this assignment for my Data Artifacts, Infrastructures, and Landscapes classes a couple years ago, and it yielded really fabulous student projects. We could also imagine speculative data architectures that better match our epistemological and ethical values. Digital humanist Jennifer Edman writes about the ways off-the-shelf tools and standards can facilitate, I don't know if that's my speaker, can facilitate connection and discovery, although that's certainly not the case with our course registration software. We use a pen. But also often decontextualizes and reduces the complexity of the material we're working with, which can cultivate distrust and doubt. Edman encourages us to create tools that provide context and provenance, that allow for corroboration from other sources and other formats, and that offer additional features that are maybe project-specific, that either promote healthy skepticism or mitigate doubt when it seems appropriate. So 2 more examples, and again, I welcome your contributions if you think of any of these examples prompt ideas from you too. These are examples from digital humanities, creative code, critical tech, net art, or any otherwise identifying objects that code or model doubt. The first I will share is my friend and colleague and former student, Or Zubalski's Merge Conflicts project, which uses Git, the version control system that tracks changes in computer files, as a textual analysis platform and a historiographic tool. They misuse the platform to compare different versions of school textbooks, in this case Israeli and Palestinian materials, to track changes and disparities, and using the language of the software to merge and commit particular framings. We thus codify our doubt of settler colonial pedagogy, and in the process unlearn it. Using the affordances of the software, Merge Conflicts denaturalizes received wisdom and demonstrates that history is something that has versions, something that warrants doubt and careful comparison. My second example is New York-based organization with whom I've collaborated over the years, the School for Poetic Computation, which focuses on artistic and critical uses of code and design. They encourage participants to doubt the affordances and ideologies built into our digital tools and to use them instead to embody social justice-aligned values, to support different ways of being, and to make us think about ourselves and our own intelligence. Doubt here is a generative poetic force. It's something we can intentionally build into our technologies and the interactions they structure in our lives. Again, I welcome any other examples you might have like to share. The final section then is dubious infrastructures. So we're kind of going from the interface to code and then down to the hard stuff that we can kick. Yet if we dig even deeper into the technical stack or extend further into the network, we recognize that doubt can also take a more material form. It can manifest in processes and data centers, servers and satellites, and in all the people that ensure these infrastructures' functionality. Maintenance workers, service providers, the invisible people who perform the piecework and content moderation that makes AI seem automated. Seem automated is the key word here. In this unit of our speculative course, we draw on the scholarship in critical infrastructure studies and disaster studies, particularly research that demonstrates how doubt and distrust are inherent in perpetually broken infrastructures. And we'd explore a variety of critical technology projects that invite us to doubt our infrastructure's reliability and functionality and equitable deployment. Such work encourages us to be more critically aware of these infrastructures' existence, to think about the values they embody, to become more engaged consumers, maybe even to agitate for new policy or new design and engineering that prioritizes accountability, justice, care, et cetera, and sustainability over efficiency and profitability. And in light of our earlier conversation about the challenges and dangers of using commercial off-the-shelf software to do humanistic and artistic things, we might think again about our capacity to actually build our own tools, not only software, but also hardware and infrastructure too. We could consider global manifestations of mesh networks, which my friend and colleague Rory Solomon has written about, and community digital networks, which my friend and colleague Greta Byram has both written about and helped to build. These networks are sometimes unreliable. Community members doubt their functionality in particular geographic terrains and weather conditions. For example, it's really hard to run. Greta builds community networks in the Appalachians, in Appalachia, where in the hollers, for instance, the deep ravines, you doubt that they're going to work sometimes. But they choose them because, first of all, commercial service providers don't want to go there, and also because they embody the values central to these communities of equity, conviviality, et cetera. We'd survey the burgeoning activity around public digital infrastructures and open infrastructures. We could also look at creative technology projects like Low-Tech Magazine's solar-powered publication, which is very transparent about when it's down. It's probably because it's a cloudy day and it's low on energy. Or Tiga Brain's Being Radiotropic, a set of environmentally sensitive routers, all of which generate illuminating doubt about our infrastructure's ubiquity and constancy, and remind us that they're the products of human maintenance and environmental resources, and that their perpetual operation has social and ecological impacts. Again, if you have any ideas, go here. Final section, shadow of doubt. After moving through the technical stack and pulling us through the digital back into the material world, I want to close the semester and our time together today with a conceptual case study, a thing, an idea that promotes a gathering of media forms and disciplinary knowledges. I like to shed light on shadows, a timeless emblem of obfuscation and doubt. In Plato's cave, obviously, shadows capture the limits of our perceptual knowledge. Painters have long been fascinated and stymied by shadows. As E.M. Gombrich writes in his book on the subject, some of the greatest observers of nature appear to have deliberately avoided the cast shadow. Leonardo da Vinci encouraged painters not to make figures appear to be illuminated by the sun, and instead to cloak them in a mist or transparent cloud to get around the challenge of actually having to paint shadows. Caravaggio and de Chirico relished in shadows. Yet shadows also illuminate and clarify. They're central to astronomy and the way we know the universe. Cognitive scientist Roberto Cosati and psychologist Patrick Kavanagh note that shadows help us discern the three-dimensional structure of the environment. Studying shadow perception reveals a vast array of sophisticated, hidden mechanisms of the visual brain, how we essentially do spatial orientation and understand three-dimensional objects, for instance. Shadows reveal, obliquely, the presence, location, and shape and size of things. They're foundational in particular architectural traditions. In Lamp of Power, John Ruskin notes that a young architect's first task should be to develop a habit of thinking in shadow. We might say that Silhouette offers a portrait of doubt, capturing only the outline but not the substance of its subjects. In his 2021 book, Black Paper, Writing in Dark Times, Teju Cole engages with Santu Mofokeng's photographs in the townships of apartheid South Africa. Mofokeng seems, quote, Mofokeng, quote, seems to test how many eccentricities a picture can tolerate before it breaks. He shoots in low light, nothing is ever quite level, figures seem to be where they are by chance rather than by intention, all of which might make us doubt Mofokeng's skill as a photographer. He's breaking all the rules, essentially. Yet Mofokeng depicts a gossamer world, that's both his word and Cole's word, that's often opaque and elusive to outsiders. The energy of his photographs, according to Cole, resides in waiting, in uncertainty, in deep shadow. His images embody what is known in the Sesotho language as sariti, a word whose senses include shadow, as well as aura, dignity, presence, and confidence. Imagine building a controlled vocabulary or teaching an LLM to accommodate such a complexly coded term, a contronym that encompasses seemingly contradictory qualities. Doubt is like certainty in that it is an epistemological shadow that manifests as a hazy presence on our maps and graphs, and whose adoption, in a world of artificially intelligent positivism, can constitute a form of dignity and confidence. If you're certain enough to not know, that's kind of a statement in and of itself today. It also serves as a tool for the confident conspiracist to cast a shadow on scientific consensus and public knowledge. Doubt encompasses intellectual skepticism, spiritual misgivings, ethical conviction. It, like the shadow, resists clear, intuitive representation, yet it pervades, as an ethical and affective force, our systems and methods of knowledge production. Doubt is precisely the kind of bafflingly overdetermined, gloriously obfuscatory, and murkily revelatory subject that demands humanistic and artistic inquiry. And for these same reasons, doubt should guide our creation, adoption, deployment, détournement, and refusal of digital tools as the world races to code itself into post-human enlightenment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for that mind-blowing lecture. Really, really. I think if ever there is a call to arms to beware of certainty in all its forms, your syllabus has to be that writ large. And by the way, I completely share your doubts about the big tent of digital humanities. I'd much rather sleep under the stars. I think that's what we do in the department.
That would have been helpful before, wouldn't it? Anyway, we have time for a couple of questions. I'm sure there must be some.
Or suggestions. I mean, it doesn't have to be questions. It could be contributions of your own examples.
Thanks so much for that really brilliant talk. Hugely suggestive in just so many ways. And I found myself wondering about aesthetic forms such as lyric poetry that use uncertainty and ambiguity to generate richer, deeper forms of meaning that seem to try and evade structures, seem to get around certain kinds of structures of meaning and certain kinds of pre-existing conceptual, predetermined conceptual structures and ideas. I'm wondering where that all fits into this, because it's a very positive, some of your examples were using doubt to undermine truth and certainty and things, but there's this sort of very generative potential in uncertainty there as well.
Well, I hope it didn't come across that all of these were deconstructive examples of doubt. They're kind of infusing something to maybe think about creative possibilities, or I hope they're constructive examples also, maybe both at the same time. But I had one of my notes that I just couldn't find a way to fit in was about the unreliable narrator and some literary forms. I want to include that too, because digital humanities, data visualization is often not data visualizations in particular, or maps, are not just standalone objects. They're often embedded in an atlas or used in data journalism, for instance, where you can use text in relation to various forms of visualization or sonification, and the two can speak to each other. So this is where maybe we could use textual forms to add context to any type of graphic. So that's something I'd want to include in the larger imaginary syllabus, that it just didn't fit it into here. I think we have the hand back there, right there.
Thank you so much for your talk. I think I have a little bit maybe of a two-part question. One is I had immediately thought of shock doctrine and the texts around risk and humanitarianism and the way in which doubt is operationalized after the fact.
I missed the word you said. You thought of, what was the word?
Naomi Klein's, what is it? Shock doctrine.
Sorry,
yeah,
the acoustics in here are a little reverberant.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I immediately thought of the way in which doubt is operationalized in humanitarian environments. And that's, apologies, a classic comment more than a question. But the second was maybe more a question about humility, because I feel like I learned so much about doubt, and I have thought about it, been able to think about it so much more expansively over the course of your talk. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about where humility plays into each aspect of this syllabus. Thanks.
Yeah, so I wrote the title of the talk, I wrote the abstract 6 months ago before I even started thinking about it, and I realized that I kind of underplayed, under-featured humility here, a few references to it. I really would have to do a lot more thinking about how doubt relates to humility, but just in terms of thinking about it in a class, that's a what would you call it, a mode of operation that I like to infuse all of my teaching, because it really makes a space for hopefully doubtful interdisciplinary thinking. Everyone is humble. You doubt the certainty and completist nature of your own knowledge. It's better to kind of share with the assumption that everyone is bringing certain things and not bringing certain things to the table. So that's a little slightly evasive ways I'm kind of warming up, trying to answer the more complicated question. But humility is kind of one of those words that's in some ways been co-opted. Like there was critique a couple years ago about empathy, empathy in UX design as being, this is where we get things like VR experiences that allow you to imagine that you're an immigrant walking through the desert with nothing to drink, for instance. Like there are ways to technologize empathy in really problematic ways. I'm sure that humility, which is very much coded by identity variables, it's a gendered, racialized, classed thing. Certain people have the privilege of demonstrating humility. When I was a junior faculty member, especially a junior woman of color faculty member, it's really dangerous to demonstrate humility and doubt because students question your authority, for instance. So I am kind of just rambling. These are certain things that have to fit in the social dimensions of humility. I run humility as an affective dimension of pedagogy, for instance. I'd be curious to think, would have to be thought out more thoughtfully and concretely in kind of future iterations of this, but I welcome if you have any suggestions of like concrete ways to fit in, or anybody else too, but that's the best I can do right now.
Thank you, Shannon. It's brilliant, really interesting. Really appreciated your framing of the culture wars through this lens of doubt. And I was wondering, how do we prevent doubt, our hesitancy, our humility from being sort of further exploited by the right? How do we distinguish it? How do we stop it from being co-opted? How do we stop it from being exploited?
Well, this is like the perpetual question right now. This is what everybody's asking. How the right, I showed the clips from Chris Rufo. It's what Latour was grappling with close to 20 years ago now. The fact that we realized that deconstructionist, post-structuralist methods can easily be, even just the fact that the right in the US is really latched on to postmodernism as a word that is, like critical race theory, a catch-all for all things that seem scary and uncertain. So I don't know that I can answer that question, but I hope that maybe thinking about the multiple valences of doubt, the fact that it is simultaneous, like it's both shadow and light. It is both something that causes critical reflection, but then offers maybe a space of gathering or possibility or clearing. I'm not a Heideggerian, but I keep using these Heideggerian terms. But I wish I had, again, a more concrete answer. I just know that it's just being aware of its weaponization, trying to find ways to more thoughtfully use these various tools like visualizations and put them in context, think about how they could potentially be misinterpreted. Again, that's probably as far as I could go right now, but there's definitely a much wider and long-spanning debate about how to recognize the utility of doubt, especially in relation to this excessive, really troubling hubris of a lot of people in governance or kind of leadership positions or the tech industry, but also realizing that it has been politicized in really frightening ways.
Hi, thank you. So I kind of got ideas when I was listening to you. So I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment or just like maybe a train of thought. It made me think of what is the other side of doubt. And then I thought about proof and the work of Stephanie Dick, who works on the, well, basically her PhD was on the automation of proof. And I think one of her main I guess, contributions was that the automation of proof changed mathematics forever. That this was like, when they started doing this, they changed mathematics, which is like a very old discipline. And that made me think, what would be the correlate of this if we think of doubt? I don't know how to say doubt, probably, but like doubt, like is doubt connected to academia itself, or is it connected to knowledge gathering? So basically my question is like, if automation of proof changed mathematics, what is changing now? What is the domain of your syllabus? Is the knowledge making itself, or do you limit doubt to something else? Not sure if that was clear. It's just main of like a thinking out loud, but yeah, thank you.
Well, I would definitely want it to be as interdisciplinary as possible, and this would definitely be something we'd have to call in a lot of guest speakers, because I would go beyond my own areas I would doubt my own capacity to do justice to certain kind of knowledge traditions, disciplines, for instance. But if mathematicians would think that the opposite, the antonym of doubt is proof, you might ask folks in other disciplines or intellectual traditions, their opposite might be certainty or faith, for instance. So in different domains, the opposite of doubt is something that represents a different kind of way of conceptualizing knowledge, belief. So just looking at the convergences and divergences in vocabulary that people would use around doubt, I think that's even productive. The fact that so much of what we think of, especially these debates about climate immigration, are a merger of all of these things. They're based on data-driven, sometimes questionable data-driven kind of analyses, maps that supposedly have making rhetorical appeals or pathos appeals. They're also based in religious belief about desert, like who deserves mercy and care, for instance. So even around any of these hot-button political issues we're talking about today, doubt, the fact that doubt is wrapped up in belief and morality and mathematical proof, all of these converge on which makes them such fraught and hard to address issues. So I think just recognizing the fact that doubt is so overdetermined and is so polysemic and means different things in different terrains helps us maybe understand. It might get, going back to the earlier question, it kind of almost shows the difficulty of addressing these challenges because people are talking past each other. But I think the recognition of the multifariousness, the prismatic nature of doubt, and the fact that it means different things in different contexts and can be marshaled politically in different ways, that itself is productive.
Okay, we're clearly not going to run out of questions anytime soon, but I think we will take one more. I think there was a hand up over here.
Thank you, Shannon. That was fantastic. How do students respond to doubt? What happens when you try to encourage students in very practical ways? Do you have tips for those of us who try to see doubt and are supposed to be talking in certain terms and things like that? Thanks.
Well, I imagine I have been really lucky at the New School, which tends to draw a very particular kind of student, those that are very socially progressive, not really looking to get high-powered tech jobs. They really want to work in kind of the creative industries or social good, for instance. So I've been lucky to work with a population like that who is already willing to question doubt. I'm now at the University of Pennsylvania, which has a ton of professional schools. So I imagine I have like Wharton business students, people who are working computer science and data science, who might come in with different inclinations, and the assumption that certainty is marketable in a different way, that doubt is going to potentially damage their hireability. Penn kind of advertises its success by starting salary of students once they get out of school, which says a lot about like what the priorities are. That is a challenge pedagogically, but I will say from experience, I've taught mapping classes over the years where a lot of students come in wanting to design an atlas related to their thesis project, whether that's, I don't know, like lots of work on immigration and borders over the years, people from different disciplines, a lot of stuff about environmental catastrophe, and they come in wanting to find the data set and create a multi-layered interactive map that tells that you can click on and off layers, and then they ultimately realize the partiality of each of those, the fact that even if you kind of merge multiple data sets to tell a layered story, that there's still kind of human dimensions. There's ethnographic dimensions of the issue that they ultimately realize they're really interested in, that sometimes data in the quantitative sense can't get at. So I've discovered that they are really excited about, or maybe liberated. Maybe in their thesis they do have to produce like the positivist map, but they like the experience of being able to use a class to think about how to productively work through their own doubt, how to convey it, what the ethical and political dimensions of that are. But it can be a challenge with certain student populations and with the very utilitarian framing of what the purpose of higher education is today.
Fabulous.
Okay.
I think at that point we should thank Shannon again very much for a truly wonderful lecture. And I very much hope there is some drinks next door and everybody is welcome to join us at reception.